Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, Lighting for Theme Parks, Creating an Experience at Last, with Hansen Colyer. My name is Mallory Misnarsic and I'm the project manager here at Harmon. A few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during this webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you can submit questions to the presenter and he'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded and a link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control. We encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harmon.com, as well as visiting Harmon Professional Training to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Hansen, the presenter for today's webinar. Hansen is a lighting manager at the Universal Creative in Orlando. His varied experience in the theme park industry has allowed him to help with the opening of many attractions, buildings, and meet and greets for the parks in Central Florida. His work is seen daily by thousands of guests from all around the world. And now I'll pass it over to you, Hansen.
Thank you so much, Mallory, Brad, and Heather, and everyone else over at Harmon for helping get this together today. Hello, everyone out there that's viewing this right now. Thank you for tuning in and hanging out with us today. A little bit about me. My name is Hansen. As you heard, I'm in Orlando. I have been in the theme park industry since about 2014 and been with Universal since 2018. I have had a lot of different jobs ranging as a technician, programmer, show control, hardware designer, and the manager position that I am in now. There have been a lot of projects that I worked at over at Disney, and now here at Universal I'm working on something a little bit larger. So right now my role over at Universal is working on a brand new project called the Velocicoaster. On the Velocicoaster, I am responsible for executing and managing all the scope, schedule, budget, contract, and the creative intent execution for these capital level theme park projects. As you can see here, this is going to have a lot of light on it, and everything that you can see before you in these pictures, I've sort of had a hand in the conversation and helping design and execute all the lighting that conceptually we would like to achieve for this attraction. In the seminar today, the objectives that I'd like to take you through are sort of a high-level overview to take you through the process and timeline of a project, soup to nuts. We're going to identify the different zones and parts of the theme park that require lighting design. While doing that, we're going to talk about the different best practices and considerations and everything to put together when you're designing for each of these different areas and try to build the best experience possible for the guests. The whole process itself is pretty involved, and we'll take you through a little bit of an outline on how we go through each of those phases and all of the different events that are going to happen while that's occurring. Programming these theme parks is quite an integrated task that has a lot of stakeholders and opinions that occur throughout the process. So we'll give you a couple of notes on how to get through all of that in a streamlined fashion to make sure that you're giving the best quality product to the client and to the guests that get to experience it later on. And then we'll sort of wrap up by talking about a lot of the fixtures that are used as far as types and somewhat of the system architecture that we go through when we're putting these large scale attractions or smaller ones together. Theme parks, it's easy to say, have an insane amount of lights. They're open at all times of day and occur in different parts of the world where there's a lot of other environmental conditions. You're allowed to do anything and everything, shop, dine, attend shows, and get on million-dollar attractions, multi-million-dollar attractions that take years to put together, and they're there for all the guests to enjoy. When you're in a theme park, you need to be immersed and into a story that's being told. Inside those stories, there is a lot of elements and show set pieces and custom elements that all have a lot of considerations, and a lot of them have a light inside. And that light adds to the story and the whole experience that guests will have as they're walking through lands or sitting in a restaurant or getting on a ride. Every time there's a light that a guest is going to see, you have to spend some time discussing that with all the designers, art directors, and people that are invested in maintaining that light fixture or element for the next 20 years. Beyond just going inside of a theme park and going on a roller coaster or 3D simulator, there's a lot of places that have themed shopping as well. And that is taking, your common mall that everyone has been to and scaling that up to something grandiose and immersive to allow people to shop and spend money, but also be entertained and placed into a whole nother world while they're doing it and interacting with things that they might find more common, restaurants and stores. But at the same time, all of those areas, the area development, facades, they require that same level of consideration and design as you're going through. Because when you have thousands of people from the general public interfacing with all of these fixtures, there's a lot that can go wrong in these permitted installations, and safety is always held to the utmost when you're going through this. For lighting, we have retail experiences that it differs greatly from that of, say, a live theater or entertainment experience, and you have restaurants and quick service dining, walk-up services that all require light because a lot of these places are open well into the evenings and have to provide that same level of coverage that the sun would provide for guests during the day. In a lot of these areas, depending on the place you are, life safety becomes a big part of it. Restaurants have been known to, set off a fire alarm every now and again. There are occasions where people need to be evacuated from a specific area for one environmental reason or another. And lighting usually plays a large role in life safety to get people in and out of buildings. When you're in the live world, it's not always the largest thought or at the forefront of your mind to think about, well, if someone pulls the fire alarm, what happens with all the moving lights that are going everywhere and your color chases and all the other sequences that are adding to the story and the immersion that people are experiencing. That extra layer of life safety and how all those systems interact in those niche cases is something that takes a lot of effort, hardware, and money to make sure that guests are all taken care of safely. And that just has to do with turning off certain lights and turning certain ones on just to make sure that everyone can meet code and get out of a building safely in case of an emergency. One of the first areas we can talk about that you do require all this design for are, roller coasters and other types of immersive attractions. On a roller coaster, it's always good to have light that it's very punchy and even. We want to have the big roller coaster be something eye-catching for the guests. The park is usually the client in these regards, and when they approach Universal Creative, for instance, to build a roller coaster like the Hulk you see there, that's an icon for them. And showcasing those icons with lighting becomes a large task, and making sure that everything is installed properly up to strict specifications, and ensuring that you have something that's going to last and be beautiful for 20 years. It becomes an eyesore pretty fast if some lights on the Hulk, some of those LEDs just started flickering due to water intrusion or something like that. On dark rides, as you can see, we use a different sort of lighting package. You're not using high intensity outdoor lights. Inside, you're using things that are more subtle, black lights, LED neon, which has become very popular, and small custom elements that help guests focus in on what they're supposed to be looking at during the attraction, but not taking away from the whole immersive experience and with bare walls or anything. For all of these attractions, roller coasters, 3D simulators, shows, there's always a queue, and you have to wait in line to do it. But the queue experience has become something, another layer that art directors and designers are using to tell that story. In the middle picture here, you can see the queue for the new Hagrid's roller coaster that opened in Orlando. Each one of these rooms is a different element of the story. It's a chapter that brings you through the experience that'll lead to getting on the coaster and tell you why you're getting on it and what you should expect when you're there. These queues are a show. Each room is its own show where you have to go through countless hours of design and review to make sure that all the integrated elements are providing the vision set forth by some of the designers in the project. Next, we can talk about area development and facades, which takes you outside of those roller coasters and attractions. When people come into your theme park, you have people from all different backgrounds and walks of life and lots of considerations. The area development and your building facades, whether that is something that is an attraction or is just an icon of your park, it requires a lot of attention to be brought to it, because that's something every guest is going to interface with and experience. They should be providing a breathtaking vista and help fulfill the experience for everyone that's coming through. You want everyone to feel like that story is being told the moment they walk into the park. And even before people walk in, these large icons are used for marketing to bring people there initially. Those marketing teams are using those photographs to put on billboards and in commercials, and the lighting on all of those will help them sell the experience to potential guests. Some people in your party, when you go to a theme park, they can't get on the roller coaster or the 3D simulator for one reason or another. And those people, they get better return on their investment in other ways. They sit at the theme park and they do people watching, and they're observing all the architecture and area development around them. Lighting specific areas in area development and facades and providing little custom fixtures here and there add to this brand and the story and bring the experience together in all those ways. You set the tone for whatever story you're telling in each specific land, and you're bringing out those different emotions that the designers and your art directors are trying to bring out of people when they come into each land. You spend more time walking through these area development spaces, walking on promenades and observing the facades, more than you do on a lot of the attractions in the park, taking away from a wait time variable, which is always changing. The immersion in storytelling while moving from land to land is what defines a theme park, as opposed to venues that are facilitated by your local municipalities, allowing people to see something that they've only experienced in movies or read in a book and put them inside that universe is something that is the main goal of all the theme parks when you come in. And the lighting is what sets a lot of the tone for the story. Many of the lighting professionals that are on this call right now know that you're steering people's feelings whenever you're changing colors or the speed at which you are providing your effects. At the end of every ride in the theme park, there's a gift shop, and retail is a big part of what these places construct. They are there to sell merchandise relating to all of these themed lands, and that kind of revenue drives more projects and more astounding things being built. A big pillar of retail lighting is to make things bright, to help colors pop up and draw the eye of the guest that's walking through that store and bring them to that piece of merchandise that's they're going to take away from that theme park day and remember every other experience that they had that day. In the theme parks, you're walking around all day, you're still getting hungry, and you have to eat. Dining in the theme parks takes more of an approach to extending that themed experience for everybody. They aim to have you walk out of a themed land into that themed restaurant within it. You use a lot of custom elements in there to make guests feel as though the universe that they are in is catering to those more human needs. And that story that you had outside doesn't stop when you go in and sit at the table. It takes just as much time and effort and consideration to design a good restaurant or quick service dining location as it would to design a queue for an attraction. There's a lot more guest interface when you're inside of a restaurant. Sometimes, guests are within reach of lighting fixtures. They are touching more and interfacing with more. They're not just walking through and observing everything before them. A big part of theme parks, this is something is all near and dear to our hearts, is live entertainment. At meet and greets, guests come in, they take pictures with their favorite characters in the park from their favorite IP, intellectual property that is being showcased in some of these different lands. Meet and greets function is paramount. You want to light these experiences well for people to take a photo, and you want to make the character that they're taking the photo with the star. The lighting inside the meet and greet should be designed to have accurate color and render skin well, so that when that camera snaps the photo that someone will purchase, they're going to look at that and feel good about themselves and that memory that they will carry on from there. It is true that the lighting people are still working for video, even at the theme parks and meet and greets. Nighttime shows are something that draw lots and lots of crowds to theme parks. It is the largest scale entertainment that a lot of them do provide, because you're entertaining almost all the guests in the park that day, or a large percentage of. You bring everything up to the largest scale possible and think about things that are high impact, lights that are going to draw people's eye, that you can get more quality than quantity, something that is higher wattage, brighter, with better throw, or functions that will allow you to entertain more guests with less. Live shows are sort of the bread and butter of what a lot of lighting people do, and it's where a lot of us begin. Those two, though, demand just as much attention due to the frequency and duration that the live shows occur. They will run all day, multiple times a day, for nearly 20 years. And at those live shows, it's not like you load in, you set up PRT, do it once or twice and strike and take it back down and maybe have a maintenance day. At these live shows, it's required for all the instruments to be performing daily at the same level, so that every guest that's coming in gets that same experience. The theaters are purpose-built usually with very complex systems, and the technicians are all specifically trained in those areas to make sure that lighting inside the live entertainment venues is working every day. They have built-in maintenance time for all of the work they have to do, and lighting checks are constructed and programmed to be very intuitive and thorough to make sure that every aspect of the show that you are using that light for is tested beforehand. Parades are something that you don't normally associate with lighting, but are really a technical marvel, because a float usually has a lot of lighting on it. If anyone has ever seen Disney's Electrical Light Parade, it is every float is clad end to end in lights, and Mardi Gras over at Universal has tons and tons of LED lights, miles of LED tape on them. But there's no wires connecting any of it. So when it comes to designing your power systems and all the distribution on those floats, a lot's considered, and how that power is stored and recharged and used over just the course of the parade. When those floats go back in, they might be recharged, they might have generators running on board. It's something that people spend a lot of time on to get the lighting just right. Beyond that, communication is also wireless. And the first rule of wireless communication for lighting is don't use it. But it becomes very reliable when you have specific managers and technicians designing you a system that's going to be inside that park and is set to run every single day without fail. That takes a lot of work, and the parade should be respected a little bit more for all the lighting that they have involved, because sometimes they're even communicating wayside to other lights inside the park and controlling what's happening in the area around the parade as the parade is going through it. All wirelessly, all without really having much transition. You just kind of all see it happen as one cohesive element. Also in theme parks, there's usually interactives that provide another axis of entertainment for everyone that's in the park. Designers use specific hardware and software which is programmed to provide guests more immersion with different peripheral interaction or interfaces. So lighting changes inside some windows over at Universal with just a swish and a flick of a wand that is purchased inside of a well-lit gift shop. In Epcot, you see the triangles. Those are just acrylic panels which get touched by a human, and then all the lights and the sound around you inside that queue space change. You can play music with the lights on the wall. Inside Disney's Animal Kingdom, there's an interesting interactive where you tickle a very large plant, and this large plant will glow and make sounds and squirt water out of it, all just by a little touch of one of the guests that came in there. It allows them to experience more of that story without, being on a ride or spending money inside of a store. When you're putting all of this together, you have to spend years designing these elements. A theme park design project will typically go between 3 and 5 years from concept to full execution. Everything that we do when we're designing for theme park lighting is to have it be maintainable. Even though I will be putting together this coaster and having it go out to the world, I will not be the one that has to take care of it 10, 15 years from now. But the decisions that we make as we go through and put these projects together will affect that end user, no doubt. Over the course of those 20 years, Murphy's Law somewhat takes over. And if it can happen out there, it will. Things will break. Some of the most outlandish occurrences that you could dream up will happen. And the technicians and specialists that are out there need to be able to fix those anomalies as fast as possible to help regain any lost revenue for the parks. Sometimes theme parks are placed in harsh environments, very cold, very hot, very wet down here in Florida. And everything that you're doing should be designed with the mindset that we want to pick things that are durable, that are going to last inside these harsh environments, and put them in places that aren't impossible to get to. When that person has to come out and fix something in the middle of the night, it's better to have them fix it quickly than spend a whole night on it because they usually have multiple things to attend to in one evening. Use designs that are modular and have like fixtures placed in many areas. That way, if one item goes bad, it's not made out of unobtainium. And by that, I mean something which takes a long time to get, is difficult to fabricate, or is one of one in an entire theme park. It's better to use like elements that the park can keep in stock as spares and deploy them when it's necessary, so that you're not forcing the client to purchase many bespoke spares where you can achieve the same effect using something that you're using in another area. Use lights that are proven, known manufacturers that demand a lot of quality and perform a lot of their own testing. Technicians that are maintaining a lot of the things in these parks, they have multiple responsibilities over multiple venues usually. And you want to design these for ease of use to help the programmers and the technicians execute these shows and keep them up and running without cursing the people that designed it and put it together. Make things connectorized. As a technical term, we know what that is, to try to put a Molex connector, a DMX connector, some proven mil-spec connector on something, just to allow a robust design that's going to survive all these different elements. And when someone has to swap out a part, they can grab one off a shelf, put together a connector, and not need to break out a soldering iron just to turn a light back on at 2 o'clock in the morning. Programming time is also something that you want to invest a lot in on the front end. Program to the utmost so that the person that comes behind you doesn't have to press too many buttons to test something or turn on a show. It's best to have someone walk into an attraction at the beginning of the day and be able to hit a button that puts it into day mode, turns on every light, makes all of your other time-based and event-based sequences be ready, be queued up. It's much more time-consuming to have someone boot up a desk, go through several pages of cues to test every individual element or turn on multiple areas all at once. When lighting is programmed nicely, you can hit one button and turn everything on, and it shouldn't really feel like a heavy system. When you're inside one of these themed queues or inside of a ride box, like in a 3D motion simulator, everything should be clean because you're telling the story, but there's always power supplies or other sort of power and data distribution hidden. You want to make sure that those are all accessible behind usually a themed access panel, or but under something that someone can get to without a ladder, or bringing in a high reach lift. Give everything to the park in a way that anyone can walk up to it and change something out or fix something to bring it back online. Designing for the lowest common denominator is something we like to say in the industry, where it should be something where you, on this call, having never been trained on an attraction or a show, could walk up to it and it will clearly tell you what to do in a series of intuitive steps. Once again, Murphy's Law takes over in terms of safety. When you do a live show 10 times a day for 20 years, you are going to have some weird things happen. Pardon me for one moment. Something will inevitably require some amount of maintenance, and when they have to get to something that may be high out of reach, you want to make sure that the technician or the specialist that has to get up there or over to a hard to reach area can do it safely. Design with that in mind and use qualified personnel to provide analysis and design. By that I mean, on the front end, capitalize on consultants and specialists in the industry that only specialize in safety. Bring them in, show them what the whole system is, the building, the lighting, the purpose of it all, tell them the story, and use those skills to put together something that someone 15 years down the line can get to without having to fill out a bunch of paperwork or do something that would put them at risk, because no matter where you work, you still want to come home to your family at the end of the day. Because we're doing lighting, electrical code is something we live and die by in the theme park world. When you're doing a live show, everything is sort of wrapped up, there's a connector on it, and you plug it all together and go. When you're putting together an architectural installation, it's permanent, and you are beholden to a different set of rules. The NEC rules that, and you have electrical inspectors from local government that are always overseeing your design. Lighting always has to be permitted due to those life safety concerns we spoke about earlier. And you want to make sure that qualified electrical engineers are putting some scrutiny over whatever those designs are to make sure that any of those gotchas that the inspectors could call you on are covered on the front end. Just to take a brief break, think about what's going on with these light fixtures that you're putting into the theme park. They're going to have their full lifespan used and exhausted while they're installed. It's not like a rental house that would have a fixture come in and be used and then cycle through its life cycle process going out on several tours. This one fixture is set in place to do its one job for a really long time. And if you are designing an attraction that runs for 16 hours a day, 365 days a year for 20 years, it'll be about 117,000 hours, just under. And the typical life expectancy of an LED is nowadays about 50,000 to 80,000 hours before you reach that 80% level or 20% brightness cut or 50% brightness cut. So when that time comes around and 10, 15 years into an installation, someone needs to go replace a fixture, that fixture's run its course. You have exhausted everything that that light can possibly give you. And when those things occur, you need to be ready to respond and have the right stock. The environmental conditions in these theme parks, whether they're in a harsh environment or indoors, always lead to the choice that you make for putting the fixture into that attraction. And those choices should always bear in mind the average lifetime or span of that fixture. Also, warranty plays a big deal into that, because when a light dies, if that light is critical to light a figure that is the star of the show, that could lead to closing an attraction and losing revenue for the park, because they cannot put people through these attractions as they would normally. In Florida, fixtures bake and cook when they're outside, reaching temperatures up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. When designing and specifying fixtures to live outdoors, take in mind its IP rating, its electrical tolerances and physical tolerances. You don't want boards to melt. You don't want connectors to fail or anything to not be reliable. So how does it all start? How does it all go? It all starts with a multi-phase design process, usually taken care of by very passionate, dedicated subject matter experts that either work for these theme parks or contracted large design firms that we all know. Every division of work must work together to create cohesive and coordinated drawing sets that can go to permit and are constructible. Most of the time, when you're a lighting person and you have permanent lighting being installed, you and I are not the ones doing it. It would be the electricians who are licensed to do so. And because of that, you want to make things as easy as possible for them. It can take up to 3 years to go from blue sky to a constructible reality in these drawing sets, where you go from concept into an initial design, preliminary, and detailed. To go, and by that I mean you have a concept, you can draw something in a rough schematic, and then move on to something that another vendor or a human inside the parks or one of the owner's employees can design off of and begin to specify some of the lights that are going to be needed. When all of that happens at every single one of the phases in the process, the drawings get reviewed, feedback is provided, you speak with all of the stakeholders as you're going through each of those drawing sets. Whenever you have a light, it has to mount to something. You have to either screw it into a ceiling, a wall, mount it onto a bar with a clamp. Those interface points are usually not something that the lighting people provide, but we are always victim or beholden to whatever those conditions are. And when you're reviewing your lighting drawings, the point where you're connecting to something that's not provided or designed by you, you always want to take time to pay careful attention to those areas. Everyone that is working on these theme park projects, lighting designers, programmers, audio, video people, architects, facility people, they all have a lot of experience from very different backgrounds, and they usually come together for these projects, offering a lot of perspective and efficiencies and experience that they've had from other industry. But they're all coming together to tell that story that people can bring home to their families and remember for years. As I said, you start with a blue sky concept, and then you draw something out that can be made or specified by another person. At that time, it's pivotal to get all of your lighting inputs into the hands of your architects or facility designers, because they need to go upstream. Lighting always has a lot of electrical demands, and when you're putting together a building, it's not just thinking about your local power distribution. You have to scale up and figure out your panel and make sure that what's feeding your panel is adequate and the loads that you're going to put on that panel are accurately accounted for, so that your architect and electrical engineers can ensure that building or area is getting appropriate service to just handle your own circuitry. Here you also start to get an idea of where fixtures are going to go, start to get ideas of counts so that you can do some roughly accurate math, conservative math, to provide those electrical inputs to all those other stakeholders. After you move through those early phases and provide all of your reviews and feedback, you move into more preliminary and detailed phases. In the preliminary design phase, as we call it at Universal, you have all of the engineering happening, all the photometric calculations, coverage. You get into the nitty-gritty on your specifications for color and lensing and any of the control options that you may have, whether you're going to use 0 to 10, DMX, Dolly, any of the other protocols that we have in on our Swiss Army knife for lighting. When you get into detailed design, after all of that work has been done and you've gone through and taken care of most of the design work for your project, you only want to be shifting around things small in a detailed phase where you're worrying about those interface points with all of the other disciplines and ensure that what you have designed is matching theirs as well, so that one drawing is showing the same thing basically in two places, or those two drawing sets can come together into one integral set that will go to the field. There's always elements in theme park designs that aren't on the same timeline. Lighting can start and then maybe a special effect is following behind it, but your lighting design is working with that special effect. So the lighting team is always working with all of the other disciplines to ensure that the designs are meeting all of their needs as well. But that might take just more administration or a change later down the line. And those change are something that we call mod docs. It's very common in the construction industry to have these come out, and it allows the people out in the field building and constructing your project, all the lighting and all the special effects, to learn whatever that update is, because when you're not on the same timeline, something could be done before another, and then that other discipline needs to correct based on whatever those conditions are for another discipline. Let's just take a minute and talk about acrylic. This is something I'm somewhat passionate about in my role for lighting, and it affects a lot of design, and is something that when you are working with other design teams, make sure to grab the reins on your acrylic, because when light shines through acrylic, a lot can happen. You're using this acrylic to light signs up, light up different walls or custom elements that have been placed throughout an attraction. Acrylic is made by tons of people on this planet in all shapes, sizes, and variations and formulations. But a lot of the formulations are standardized. However, every different manufacturer is going to yield a different render with that formulation. Keep that in mind. It's just like with a light. If you were to buy a Martin light and try to shoot blue out, and you buy another manufacturer's light and shoot blue out, you might get two different blues. And that is because of, as we know, binning and other variances when people design fixtures. The same thing goes with acrylic. Many manufacturers will send you samples. They will allow you to shoot out their different elements along with different manufacturers. But even though you are handed something that is a white piece of acrylic and you have a stack that all look white, they will change how your light reads. Some might shift you more towards amber. Some will take out a lot of intensity more than you wish. Some will shift you more towards blue or add more different textures to the light. Color shift is very noticeable and is something that people always have opinions about when you are presenting something to your designers and stakeholders. You want to make sure that you're making a choice that they're going to usually agree with, or provide a couple options that you can somewhat steer the design towards. Whenever you are picking the acrylic, you also want to be sure that your color temperature is factored into whatever that is. If you have a warm light and you want it to continue to be warm or warm up, you may lean towards acrylic that'll shift you more yellow or provide other hues or texture based on whatever custom element you're lighting. Or if you want it more cold, make sure that you are using something that might be more true or shift you more towards blue so that that high, harsh color temperature can be showcased better. After design, after all the coordination and administration, you usually build it. And within the theme park world, you have to go through things very systematically, and sequencing rules all. Installation takes the longest time. You have to worry about conduit, cable, and when you're not just laying cable out on a truss and plugging it together, it takes a lot more time and effort and coordination. I've heard a lot of professionals say it's like herding cats sometimes, to try and get hundreds of people across many acres of a project to install a certain piece of conduit to connect two dots. And that is a lot of what our job is as lighting professionals in theme parks, is to ensure small elements, things that are maybe one-off or only a couple things, are all taken care of, albeit tedious at times. The nature of the projects determine much of the process, meaning if you have a large-scale roller coaster, that's going to be much more different than if you're building a meet and greet. The meet and greets are usually smaller, it's taking up a smaller footprint, and the complexity of whatever lighting system you're installing into those is going to be vastly different than that of a roller coaster, which would span multiple acres inside of a park. Once it's all installed, once everything is connected up, you have to turn it on, cross your fingers, and see what happens. And that brings us into commissioning. Upstream of our dimmer racks, the electrical engineers and the electricians have worked on getting any of those distribution panels and transformers on and circuited up to our equipment. At that point, we can test out all of those interface points that have landed into our racks that might be a couple acres away at the parks, and make sure that the circuit that we intended that light to live on inside of one of our relay panels or controller or dimmer racks is ending up where it's supposed to. You want to test and make sure that things are connected properly, you don't have any data issues, and you can control everything the way that it's intended to. You address things in this phase, take care of anything that is IP addressed, DMX addressed, and try to capitalize on RDM wherever you can. After that, you get into the programming. And this also tends to be very lengthy because you are working with every other discipline that has been designing with you and installing with you for the past couple of years or months, depending on your project. The lighting programmers, whether it be you, one of your friends, or one of the vendors that you have working with you, should put together a lot of options. Flexibility is one of the best things to maintain as you're going into the field out of the design. And design for flexibility, design for all the nice to haves, and then allow yourself to allow people to pick and choose, all the art directors or stakeholders from licensed intellectual property, to make the best choice that they would like and not just give them one option. At that time in programming, you're not only working on how the lighting looks, but also when it's happening. And usually at the theme park, the lighting programmer isn't programming for the entire attraction. The lighting programmer is working on their own looks and their own effects, but isn't necessarily worried about their own timing or sync. A lot of it is held in another system that is providing event-based triggers to trigger the lighting system and the audio and the animatronics all at once. That's sometimes what takes a lot of time, is working with all of the other disciplines to ensure that that one moment where a light is supposed to come up at a certain time to illuminate a large King Kong figure, and the roar that comes out of its mouth are all seamless and feel natural, like it's supposed to happen, because your brain is very good at picking up things that are out of place. And programming down to the moment and the frame is something that theme parks live and die by to help assist with that immersive experience. A little bit more detail for installation. As we talked about, conduit and cable takes the most time, and you always want to work with all of the other disciplines that have electrons flowing through them. Lighting is always very demanding when it comes to electrical work, but you sometimes need to ensure that your partners get in at the right time, whether that be before you or after you for lighting. More about those interface points. Triple check all of those points where your lighting needs to go. In construction, you don't know what's going to happen. There are a lot of environmental and site conditions which will demand adaptation from the lighting team. And make sure that all of your mounting surfaces are being coordinated. All of your tolerances are within that 2 inches so that you can make sure that all of your creative intent is still being met. And a fixture that you need here doesn't end up over here, because there will be a picture there. Let's just take a moment and talk about what rules the entire theme park lighting world, and that's budget and the almighty VE. VE is a term that we use a lot, which is called value engineering. Value engineering is allowing yourself to substitute one item for another that's usually cheaper, but it'll allow you to still make the same impact for the guests. When you're going through your design process, spec the best things, spec the most high dollar items you can, all of the nice to haves and conveniences which everyone wants in a permanent lighting installation, but may not necessarily need. At some point in time, there will be a cut. These projects are always governed by the almighty dollar, and sometimes you have to make hard choices. Some of those nice to haves might stick around after a value engineering phase or occurrence, but you sometimes have to accept the fact that lighting can do things 6 different ways, and you have to make those hard choices and provide a product that'll still achieve the goal, but maybe not come from your favorite manufacturer, but should still perform and meet all the same specifications as the other. A lot of the times in the theme park industry, people will use the term money cannon. That makes things possible that may be impossible, and more funds are released than you would have expected to achieve a goal for creative intent. Conversely, sometimes that money cannon does not exist, and your pot or your bowl does have a bottom, and certain projects just need to make hard choices and achieve lighting effects without going over the top, as we all like to do sometimes. When you're putting things out in the field, lights are always one of the last items to get put up. Lights are always a long lead item. It always takes 8 to 12 weeks to get a light. If anyone has specified lights before, you know a lot of it is off the shelf, but configured to whatever that application is. Your light engine might change, your lensing may change, your power, plugs, data. That's usually configurable with a lot of manufacturers out there. And because of that, it takes time to get those fixtures into the hands of the project that will be installing them. Plan ahead, plan for a lot of time when it comes to your procurement for lighting. And in times like we have now during a global pandemic, lighting can take even more time to procure. So make sure that you put float into your procurement schedules for lighting just in case, because Murphy's Law usually takes over in the theme parks. When you're putting power supplies, data distribution, or any other ancillary equipment out, they're going to end up everywhere. When you have small compact spaces or large areas, ensure those access panels are well coordinated and themed. Or if you need to get to something that's hidden behind a wall or up high, put it in a place that is discreet, but allow people to still get to it when they need to, a year, a month, days down the line. Some areas are much harder to access just by the nature of the design and how the architect put everything together. Put together a safety plan. Use those consultants and professionals that are at your disposal to put together a system that will allow you to maintain all of that without having to put anybody in jeopardy. Also, high dollar and entertainment type fixtures should be the last things to go in. When we say the term dust free, that's the idealized environment that you put lights in. When everything's done being painted, all of the wire is pulled, the floor is swept, those finishes are done, things are happening above you are complete. That way, your high dollar custom light fixture that took 16 weeks to get is less likely to be destroyed by another trade or laborer that is out there working in a whole other area, but may not necessarily understand the fragility of some of those fixtures. When you're doing that, make sure that you're capitalizing your electricians, integrators, other designers to watch and look over any of those specific elements that play a key role in telling your story and took a lot of effort to get into your hands in the first place. When it comes to commissioning these systems after everything is turned on and working, you want to take a certain systematic approach to getting everything on and working. Organize, plan, do it more than you're comfortable doing, because that will pay dividends on the back end when it comes to turning on your lighting system in a theme park. Documentation is what we all live and die by, because a lot of it is contracted. You need to make sure that you are dotting your I's and crossing your T's to allow the end user that's putting together your rack or running all the wires into it know where it needs to go clearly, and cut down on guessing and questions and all of that time being burned through uncertainty. Before anything ever gets installed out in the field, when you're testing things, try to pre-address them as much as you can and get everything ready so that when you plug it in, it will hopefully behave in the way that it's intended to do. When you're commissioning, it's always good to befriend the person who's in charge of your network. A lot of lighting people have good networking skills, but our systems are generally a lighting network all on their own. Because of that, make sure that person has a good rapport with you. That way, should we need to make any changes or configuration updates at that time, they're happy to do so and will cut down on any downtime that you have to get your system fully programmed. Another part of commissioning is bringing any satellite equipment online and taking care of any of that detailed programming that allows someone to walk up, push a single button at a hard button or a soft button at any station and bring online an attraction or take care of any of the specific functionalities that are needed in any of those spaces. Excuse me. It is also good at that time to verify and test all that communication with your controllers that are handling sync or any of the other systems that you're talking to, whether that be special effects or video or animatronics. For programming, this is why it takes a lot of time. We're going to go through this pretty slowly. Sometimes you're programming and it's not comfortable when you're at a theme park. A lot of the time it comes down to a rolling cart, an extension cord, and some long data lines to get you back to where you need to be. When guests are inside these spaces, they're not meant to be conducive to a programmer at front of house. You don't have everything set up cleanly. It's somewhat like guerrilla programming, and you need to be out there and moving from space to space to tell that story. You want to use the instruments to add to the story and not make the lighting always the star of the show. People like the show set and the architects are the ones that are designing this space. And as the lighting folks, we're painting those rooms and areas to showcase that work and all of the detail that is put into some of these structures. Subtlety rules all when you're going through and programming. It doesn't need to be a lot of flash and trash. It doesn't need to be a lot of moving lights. It's better to take the Hitchcock approach to programming, where you can create magic and do things with timing and subtle changes in dimming and texture that allow the guests to be more immersed in that environment and not necessarily think about the lighting, but think about the universe that they're supposed to be rooted in, or that experience. As you become more comfortable with the looks in each one of these, cube rooms or show scenes or meet and greet areas, it's important to bring in all of the art directors and designers or stakeholders from licensed intellectual property to make sure that they're also okay with how you're showcasing their brand or idea. Because these will be around for so long, it's important to document all of those buy-offs, ensure that when people are agreeing on something, it's the best choice for them, the lighting system, and the guest. After it's all said and done, and you have the buy-offs, and you have everything programmed, and you are able to get your system online without too much headache, it's important to test all of those elements for a long time. Make sure that there's no infant failure, to ensure that there's no anomalies in the programming or niche situations in logic that could provide a less desirable result due to missequenced button pressing or any other mistake that someone could make during operation. Towards the end of the project, you are always working for someone else. In the theme parks, they will come to the creative groups or the construction and development arms of the company and ask for a ride. After it's all been put together, they need to be provided the keys to that project or element. When you turn it back over, it's always important to train the people that will operate and maintain any of those elements moving forward. When you're training them, you want to provide an overview. Sometimes it's good to document all of those trainings with video, because the people that you train on how to turn on your lighting system may not be the same people that are turning it on 3 or 5 years from now. You want to take everyone through the system soup to nuts, to start how to turn it on, where all those power supplies are hidden, where those themed access panels are. You want to take the technicians and the owner and operations all through how to get to some of those hard to reach lights safely, what any of the best considerations are when you're putting things back, and all of the notes on focus and programming as well. That documentation that you worked on for several years is going to be finalized when it's turned over at the end of the project and provided to the owner. And it should be exactly as it's built at that point, to allow anyone 3, 5, 20 years from then to read them, be able to decipher how it was done and why, and be able to improve upon things or fix them when the time comes. Lastly, we always have administrative duties as lighting folks, along with the documentation, the focus notes, and any of those training documents. It's important to make sure that whoever you worked with to get it done is paid and not liable for anything else on the project. Turn over any of those final checks or sign-offs to your designers and integrators to make sure that they have completed all of their duties and punch list items have all been closed out. What kind of fixtures are used in a theme park? We talked a lot about how they're always going to be exposed to harsh elements, and it's good to respect the IP rating and UL listing and ETL listing that you see on a lot of fixtures. You use miles of linear LED inside of theme parks, whether you're uplighting a facade, you are providing cove lighting to a restaurant or a retail space, or using pixel effects to run video. There is no shortage of linear LED in any theme park that you'll visit anywhere around the world. Along with that, you want to use instruments that are able to withstand all of those environmental conditions. Martin has a great line of environmentally approved fixtures that are set to be outside and last for a lot of those 20-year installations. Theatrical and entertainment fixtures, although a lot occur inside, some occur outside, you want to specify those with the same mindset and take into consideration how hot will that light get during the day? Is it ready to turn on right away when the time comes at dusk or in the evening? And is that light suitable for its location? Is it safe to place where it is? Are there other accessories that you can buy for those fixtures, like domes or something, to keep them running longer or survive those conditions that you're going to put them in? Additionally, when you're installing them, get every accessory, because when you're going into focus, when you're going into programming, get the buy-offs from all the stakeholders. They will tell you things that you could have never planned for, or have thoughts and opinions about how lights are seen or viewed or perceived that aren't necessarily at the forefront of a lighting person's mind, and make sure you have ways to conceal lights or hide them or make them less noticeable. Because once again, the lights are never the star of the show in a theme park. They are adding to the experience. Most of the things in theme parks are custom and bespoke, which leads to a lot of the lead time and complexity. A lot of the fixtures themselves, though, are just a lampshade, for lack of a better term. You take a light that has been manufactured and proven and tested, and you place it inside of a shell and shining through acrylic, which you also want to take time to make sure is specified to provide you the view and render that you are looking for that element. They all need to be engineered. They all need to be tested. In this first image, you see what is endearingly known as a punch block. The punch block is filled with LED, but this needs to be able to perform in all conditions reliably for all the guests that are going to punch the light many, many times in one day. And because of that, you want to ensure that things are engineered to design literal abuse from guests hundreds of times a day and maintain safety while they're doing it. If that block were to come down on someone's head, they could be severely injured. And you want to ensure that it is engineered and specified to the point and constructed robustly so that those types of failure modes are not possible. Along with custom elements that are being abused, you have elements that are set to look beautiful and add to the immersion, but provide a typical function for anyone in the environment. You have to provide area downlighting, ADL, in almost every single land and every promenade. But you don't want those poles to take away from that experience. Themed light poles are everywhere in every theme park. They're touched, they're scratched, people lean on them, and they need to provide all of those conveniences to guests, whether you set a drink on it or just have to take a rest leaning up against that pole all day long. and still be reliable to give them adequate coverage at night. There are other elements that are custom are meant to just be viewed and not touched at all. You can see in the last image, this is a series of glass chandeliers that exist in a hotel here in Orlando. They're far away from guests. No one can touch them. No one would be at risk of getting cut by glass or having anything fall because they're all engineered to hold themselves up, usually with secondary retention. In the lighting world, we always make sure that we have secondary retention on permanently mounted fixtures or entertainment style lights that everyone knows you put a safety cable on. But these fragile chandeliers require a lot of scrutiny when you're installing them because they need to meet all those strict guidelines, but also go up right the first time, and it usually can't afford to be broken because schedule and budget are always looming overhead to make sure that the lighting installation goes in without a hitch. So to wrap this up, I would like to just take you guys through what it's like to build one of these systems. They can vary in size and complexity. Sometimes you have humongous controllers. Sometimes they're very, very small. You might have a dongle. You might have something that is rack mounted. It is not typical in a theme park to use entertainment style lighting controllers. You don't use a Grand MA full size to program a meet and greet. Not typically. And you definitely wouldn't have something like that sitting in there permanently. If that is your flavor, your favorite flavor of programming tool, it's okay to use, but you will generally find yourself using a rack mount version of something that'll be permanently installed. Small is definitely okay if the venue's small. Don't buy more universes than you need to. DMX is very expensive to license, and not all budgets in every project allow themselves to have something that is, $10,000, $30,000 installed, and especially have a spare sitting around just in case anything were to go wrong. Data distribution should be considered for the end user. If you see on the far right, that is a data distribution box meant for permanent architectural installations provided by a well-known data distribution provider here in the lighting world, Pathway. And allow those to be in places that the technicians can get to safely and easily. That way, if anything should go wrong, it can be fixed. Program lots of test functionality to allow these people that go into the attraction every day to press a button or a series of buttons and know that the system that they were working on yesterday is going to work the same way today as they expect it to. Turning on an attraction is definitely like starting a pot of coffee. Keep it simple, keep it reliable, and allow people to not have to think about a complex lighting system. Just think about the beautiful lighting that is happening before them. Thank you all. It's been a lot of fun. Just to wrap this up a little bit, if we've taken away anything from today, we want to design for maintainability. Theme parks rely on safe and thought out systems to continue efficient operation every single day. When you go to a theme park, you're getting every single lighting element you've ever experienced or interfaced with thrown at you in one place. You will have LEDs, you will have lampposts, you will have complex entertainment style systems, you will have large scale building facades, and everything put together in one spot. And if you enjoy lighting design, you can get fulfillment in almost every facet in the theme parks. Thank you all for your time today. Feel free to ever reach out should you have any comments or questions. And once again, thank you to the Martin team for allowing me to put this on.
Great. Hansen, we do have some questions if you have time.
Sure.
Perfect. The first one is, What are some of your go-to fixtures?
What are some of my go-to fixtures? Um, it's a lot of LED tape, to be honest. Whenever you have the custom elements that we were talking about, show set or um, interactives and things like that, want to find highly reliable LEDs that will fit the bill. There's a company called Environmental Lights who provides great LEDs that we can cut up into any form and function and have them installed behind beautiful areas. Also, Gantom lights, if anyone is familiar with those, they're something that pack small and play big and allow you to provide a lot of good coverage and high impact lighting without having something in a large form factor and not be seen by guests.
Great. So we have a couple more coming in. So the
All
next
right.
one is, what is the council in which you most like programming?
Personally, I'm a Grand MA programmer. Most of my experience has been inside that, but equally, it's Mosaic, and that allows us to do most of these theme park attractions. Yeah, an ETC Mosaic is one of my favorites in an architectural, and then I program Grand MA should it be a live or a more large scale installation.
Great. The next question is, how do you reach a balance between safety and design?
That's a hard one. There is always something that is a compromise when it comes to safety and design. A lot of these installations demand things to look clean and not have any of those, administrative elements be viewed. But you have to always work with the people that are in charge of the art and the final look closely with those that are designing your facility to make sure that if you have, for instance, a unirail system that allows you to clip off to maintain fixtures on a precipice, that unirail system is discrete but still placed in a way that isn't going to take away from the overall experience for guests. You need to have all of the stakeholders together and allow options for, theming and shrouding and concealment to always be on the table, but while having the conversation for accessibility.
Great. So we have some coming into chat too. So it says, thanks for the brilliant webinar. My question is, when visiting an attraction, I have often wondered how the signal interaction between the lighting control, a ride control system, and elements like animatronics and projection V system is done. Is there a standardized protocol or hardware?
That's a great question. It's very common to use a lot of similar equipment in many theme park attractions to handle that one element. You're sort of touching on how the lighting programming and ever is not handling a lot of that sync. You're sort of referring to a show controller. There are several standard show controllers. A V16 by Alcorn McBride is something that's used in many theme park attractions all over the world, and that allows you to do a lot of TCP or UDP communications with other subsystems. It's very common to use Beckhoff controllers, and it's very common to use other PLCs, Allen Bradley, um, Siemens, any of those PLCs that allow you to have or a high density and high volume I/O go out to different systems and interact at and be one centralized clock to ensure that the ride, the show, the video, and everything is behaving in sync. It is very difficult to allow all those systems to be in charge of themselves because unless everyone's synced to the same clock, you can have a lot more failure points, and it's better to use a V16 or another PLC to provide that centralized distribution.
Great. The next question is, did you work in any parts of the industry before theme parks? If so, how did you transition to theme parks?
Oh, yeah, I was a programmer in a lot of the live environments. I did a lot of corporate before getting into the theme parks, so worked in a lot of hotels and ballrooms. It was a transition mostly out of necessity. It was something where I found out I would, you know, I'd gain benefits from the full-time job inside of a theme park, working as a W-4 employee and moving out of the contract world and doing a lot of grinding and hustling to get lots of gigs. It was nice to transition to the theme park world where it's more steady, not necessarily a 9 to 5, but you have to prove your worth and do a lot of learning inside the theme parks in order to move up.
Perfect. The next question is, as a student wanting to get into the industry from the live event sector, are there any goals or sources that I should look into getting into the LX and AV design for themed entertainment?
There is something called the Themed Entertainment Association, TEA is what they are called, and that serves as a network and a social element to allow professionals and vendors and theme parks and everyone to have a shared network to get new talent or see new technologies and come in. I would recommend that you look into the TEA, and they have local chapters in most parts of the world and country where you can start getting your name out there to get into the industry.
Perfect. The next one is, what are the similarities and differences between lighting for film and lighting for theme parks?
That's a good question. In mostly, when you're lighting for film and theme parks, there is a large overlap at the meet and greet level and any of the live entertainment shows which have IMAG or other large video elements that are integral to them. So when you're still working for the video team sometimes, because when you're taking a photo, you need to make sure that your color temperature is matching any of the cameras that will be monitoring those people, and that you're working closely with all the video teams to ensure that content and light on stage and light from out in the house are all providing that one cohesive look. So it's mostly, I would say, in live shows and meet and greets, less that inside of an attraction or a roller coaster.
Great. So we have some more here. So the next one is, what are some guidelines you use to design looks for rides and attractions?
That is something that takes a lot of time and attention. When you're designing looks for these attractions, it's every area. It's not that you're the designer that is looking at one stage and you're looking at individual areas. You're looking and considering what's the look that's on the guest, whether they're standing in your queue or they're sitting in the house at a show. You want to make sure that you have several looks that will best provide immersion to the guests, and then provide looks that add to the story more so than giving you that personal satisfaction of uh, what may look cool, because we're all trying to tell the story from the art director's standpoint, not necessarily you. And when you're assembling those looks, give the art directors and the creative folks that level of flexibility, where if they need to change some timing or um, how effects behave or what colors change and timing, make sure that's all modular when it comes to putting your looks together. Pools and presets and um, that you live and die by.
Cool. With a design built to last for 20 years, how often is a redesign factored in? Does technology such as switching to LED drive these decisions?
More or less, yes. 25, 30 years ago, when you were designing lighting for an attraction, it was a large undertaking because everything was under conventional power, and lighting had humongous loads and requirements in order to drive those systems. Things now with much less loads are allowing designs to become more efficient, um, buildings to become more efficient, and projects are able to not hemorrhage as much money into electrical loads just for lighting systems. And LED allows you to still have high volume switchgear, but not put as much strain on that system just to provide you good looks.
Great.
And the other part of that, in terms of redesign, a lot of these attractions might be there for more than 20 years, and at a certain point in their life, they may go under a rehab where you're taking out old switching equipment and old fixtures and providing more efficiency and life and brightness to one of these attractions with LED.
Great. The next one is, do theme parks primarily use their own staff for lighting design and programming, or do they bring in freelancers?
It's a large mixture of both.
Okay.
To be frank, there is a lot of people that are working in parks right now designing beautiful things, and there are a lot of high-level companies working for those same theme parks, making it all happen. It's very much a collaboration from those two different sides.
Perfect. The next question is, what are the longest and shortest timelines you have seen for a lighting project?
There are timelines where you sometimes only have a week to get something turned around, and sometimes you have 3 years. Certain interactive experiences or meet and greets may go very quickly. Maybe you might have 3 months from design to execution, and then your installation timelines and commissioning get compressed down to a week to get it all up and running. And those are the times where you put in many, many hours to ensure that you hit those milestones and open on time.
Perfect. The next one is, have you participated in the design or programming of the Halloween Horror Nights? And what is the process of that if you have?
I I personally have not participated in any of that work for Halloween Horror Nights. I can say that I know who does a lot of the lighting design for that. I know of him, and that he takes a lot of pride in all of that work. And there are dedicated teams for Halloween Horror Nights that work year round. As soon as Halloween ends, they get Christmas vacation, and into the new year, lighting design for those projects begin. And those installation and programming durations take a very, very long time due to how detailed all of the houses are.
Cool. The next one is, how many people are usually working on a lighting project like the Velocicoaster you mentioned at the beginning?
For lighting on that Velocicoaster, I am the sole point of contact for um, the internal management of the lighting on that project, yet it's not just me. There are many, many talented people for my design firm and the integrators, the electricians, and facility engineers that are helping me as well. If I was to ballpark it, it would probably be at least a dozen names are very, very important and key to the success of a lighting system on the Velocicoaster.
Great. The next question is, what project are you most proud of being involved in and why?
Um, the, the project that I'm actually most proud of has very little to do with lighting. It was something that I did when I was working at Disney, and it was the rehab for Big Thunder Mountain, which occurred in 2016. And I had a great time getting that attraction up and running because it was, one, a large challenge for me, and two, because when it came down to it, I was able to provide some of my own art direction for the geyser elements that are still being seen today. And I just know that that programming and how those geysers look will be there for a long time. And I know that I was standing there kind of directing the programming at the time. And it was fun. But there is
Very,
plenty of light on those.
very cool. The next question is, you mentioned RDM. Why do you find it so important beyond the initial setup phase?
The RDM is important because it can give a lot of feedback. A lot of the architectural fixtures provide you key information through RDM. When you have outdoor fixtures baking out in the sun all day, they can provide you information like temperature feedback, and those types of bits can be placed into programming to help with startup. If you are, say you don't want a fixture's internal temperature to be 125 degrees when you turn it on. Even though it has constant current running through it and providing you feedback, you don't necessarily want to turn on emitters to generate more heat if it's too hot. So you can create programming that says, turn on a fixture once it reaches an internal temperature below 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And those sort of higher level functions of RDM can be baked into lighting programming to ensure longer function throughout the entire system. And additionally, it allows one to install a fixture and program it from a satellite location without necessarily having to worry about flicking dip switches or hitting buttons in awkward areas.
Perfect. We have a couple more questions. So the next one is, can you talk a little bit about the mock-up process and scheduling T&A time in design and on-site applications?
That's a very detailed, thought-out question. When it comes to mocking up things on the front end of a project, it's very important to ensure that you have the means and methods figured out on several elements, whether they be important show elements or effects that are set to be implemented. Those mock-up processes always require their own level of infrastructure and budget and concealment, because normally you're working on something that's very high level and confidential, because on early stages of development, the public shouldn't know what magic you're going to create on that project. It takes a lot of time to make sure that when you mock that up, whatever that element is, you have achieved your intent and means and methods, you bake that into your design, and then at a certain point, when you go into your test and adjust phase, that's what they mean by T&A, during test and adjust, that you are bringing back that same visual and all those means and methods, and you're able to connect those dots from what originally impressed designers or art directors to what you're bringing to the field.
Great. So the next question is, what advice would you give a lighting designer who wants to work in the theme park industry?
One of the biggest things I could say is, don't worry about starting in a less than ideal situation. Your reputation and your attitude define you more as a lighting designer in the theme park world than however many shows you did before you. It's better to let your work speak for itself, be humble, and be eager to solve problems with a smile on your face.
Great. We have one more question. So of the various elements in theme park lighting, what is your favorite to work on? Attractions, shops, live shows, or other elements?
One of my favorite elements to work on is large-scale spectaculars, things that take an entire theme park and turn that into a show with projection on facades and lighting everywhere, coming off of buildings and from poles and trees, and taking what you experienced in a theme park for many hours and completely changing that vista and experience into a large-scale immersive show.
Great. That looks like all the questions that we have. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you, Hansen, for this presentation. It was an awesome one.
Thank you so much, Mallory. I had a lot of fun. Thank you, Brad, and everyone else at Martin for helping out, and thank you, everybody, for hanging out and listening.
Perfect. I hope everyone has a good afternoon.
Thank you, Hansen. Great job.
You too. Thanks so much, Brad.
Thanks, Hanson. Bye, everyone.